I stepped off the last bus just past midnight, the quiet hum of its engine fading behind me as the doors slammed shut and the lights dipped into darkness. The street where I stood was empty, skewed by the orange glow of a few flickering streetlights, the sidewalks cracked and uneven, abandoned for hours. My apartment key mirrored cold metal in my hand. I should have waited for the next bus or used a rideshare, but I wanted to feel free, walking home like I used to before everything changed. The air was sharp, a crisp edge in the damp November night. My breath came out in ghostly puffs, and I pulled the collar of my jacket up against the wind. The road ahead stretched far and empty, the houses silent behind locked doors and shuttered windows. I lived somewhere between safe and forgotten, in a neighborhood where the streetlights sputtered and shadows held weight. Halfway down the block, I heard something, a soft thump, like someone kicking at a porch step or dropping something heavy on a wooden deck. I glanced at the house past. It looked deserted or at least unwelcoming. The windows dark, the grass overgrown. I started walking faster, adjusting the weight of my bag on my shoulder. The sound repeated, thump. Another drop. The hairs on the back of my neck rose. I resisted looking back. My phone vibrated, a text from a friend checking in. I ignored it. Something deep inside told me to call for a ride, that this was wrong, but ego nudged me forward. I was just a few blocks from home. The street bent left, leading to a narrow path between two fences, barely wide for two people side by side. The fence on the right had long since collapsed in one spot, leaving a gap where the boards lay strewn on the ground. I thought I saw a figure slip through the gap, just a movement in peripheral vision, gone when I turned. The streetlights didn't reach there, and for a moment I froze, the world narrowing to the sound of my footsteps and the subtle static of my phone in my pocket. I walked past the gap, keeping the fence on my left now as I passed. My breathing sounded too loud. I heard it distinctly. Footsteps behind me. Not paced like walking. They were slow. Deliberate. I quickened my pace. The path opened into a wider street, and I almost relaxed. There was a brighter light ahead, closer to home. But the footsteps kept rhythm with me. I risked glancing back. Nothing. Yet the air felt heavier, colder, as if someone had turned on a fan after being in a sauna. I made it to a lamppost where the street widened and houses felt occupied. I glanced over my shoulder again. Something darker than the night itself moved near the fence line about 20 feet back. A tall shape, limbs long and thin. I couldn't see features, just a silhouette that should not have been there. I stopped, heartbeat rising. The figure froze too. Then I started walking again, faster this time, no longer pretending this was normal. I passed the lamppost, but once I was past it, the light didn't reach the sidewalk well. Shadows swallowed the pavement. Ahead, I saw a driveway with a car parked inside, a safe zone maybe. I walked to it, out of the center of the street. My phone buzzed again. My friend, you home yet? I fumbled to bring the screen up. It demanded fingerprint. I unlocked, nodded to myself. I typed, on the way. When I looked up, I stopped dead. The figure was right there, standing between two cars across the street, its body pointed my way. I couldn't run, my legs locked. My mind raced, but the figure didn't move. It just stood. No features discernible. No face, just darkness. I felt exposed and alone. It took a step toward me. I took a step back. It tilted its head like a curious dog, not human, but it was tall, unnaturally so. The sidewalk behind me was empty. I had nowhere to go but forward. I tried to move and nearly stumbled. Then I noticed its arms stretched, fingers long, spindly, more like roots than human hands. It raised the arm slowly. I dropped the phone, startled at the noise of plastic hitting concrete. Then I ran. My shoes slapped the pavement, the cold air biting my lungs. I didn't look back, but I heard something behind me, soft scuffing sound of feet sliding on pavement. I ran faster, heart pounding hard in my ears. The houses opened into a wider street. Ahead I saw my building faintly, the yellow light from a window on the second floor. But between me and it lay the cross street, and a tall, dark building that blocked the view until I passed the corner. I made the turn, sprinting, and as I cleared it, I glanced up. It was gone. I skidded to a stop under a streetlight, hand on my knees, gasping. My body trembled. I waited for a minute, listening. Nothing. No footsteps behind me, no drapes rattling in the wind, nothing. Just my own ragged breathing. I swallowed hard. I got back up and hurried the rest of the way home, key in hand. I tried to rationalize, maybe a homeless person wanting direction, maybe someone playing a prank. But the tallness, the unnatural shape, still haunted me. I fumbled with my door lock, glanced over my shoulder at the dark hill eye of windows. Inside, I slammed the door, locked it. I leaned against it, sliding down to the floor, staring at the knob. I sat like that for a long time, trying to calm my racing mind, the unease that stung like cold water. Eventually, I got up, shut off all the lights in the apartment except the living room lamp. I called a friend and told them what happened. They tried to joke about it. I wasn't amused. Sleep was thin. The darkness in my apartment felt different. I lay awake listening to distant sirens, a lone car passing, the creak of old wood in the building. Every shadow felt like movement. At 3 a.m., I heard a knock on my front door. One hard, deliberate knock. I froze. My blood turned to ice. I hadn't given anyone my new address. I didn't expect anyone. I didn't have a peephole in that door. I pulled out my phone and dialed a number, just in case. The knock came again. Short, 2 taps, pause, then 1. I eased the chain lock closed, cautious. "Hello?" I called in a low voice. No answer. Silence. I didn't move for minutes. Eventually the knocking stopped. I waited until I heard footsteps retreating down the hallway outside. My heart still pounded like a drum solo. I stayed awake until dawn broke, barely closing my eyes. The next day I left for work late. The walk to the station felt fraught. Every rustle of leaves, every flicker of someone stepping out of a vehicle made me flinch. I told myself I'd take a cab home that night, but night came and the bus schedule sucked. Again, I thought I should just walk the last few blocks. I got off at the stop and walked the same route. The streetlights looked older, their bulbs yellow, low, shadows stretching like arms. I tried to remind myself I was just being paranoid. But the path between the fences, the one with the gap, felt different. I passed it cautiously. I deliberately walked in the center of the sidewalk, away from the fence line. Midway through the block, I heard something again. The thump, like someone kicking a trash can lid down near the fence. I didn't look. I kept walking. Then I heard a breath behind me, a slow exhale. I didn't dare stop. There was no way I could outrun whatever it was if it started. I reached the lamppost again, the same one, and looked back. Nothing. But the feeling, the deep unease, it hovered. I texted my friend, "I'm having a rough one." They told me to stay at a friend's house. I thought I could push through. Coming closer to my building, the moon was hidden behind clouds. I thought I saw someone standing under a streetlight halfway down the block, facing away. I walked closer. The person turned. It wasn't a person. The head was too long, the body too narrow. I blinked. The figure stepped forward. It wasn't wearing any clothes I could recognize. It was darker than the night, like a void filled itself. I froze in the faint light. The figure tilted its head at me, then turned and began to move away, walking slowly, deliberately along the street parallel to mine, without moving toward me, but neither away, just walking. I should have sheltered somewhere, run past it, but I watched, captivated in terror. It passed a car, slipped into a shadow just beyond the headlight's reach. Then it vanished. I broke out of my trance and sprinted the rest of the way. I fumbled again with the door. Inside, I flicked on every light. I shattered the chain lock shut. I called the friend again and said I couldn't stay home tonight. They invited me over. I packed essentials and walked out quietly, leaving the apartment dark behind me. That night at my friend's place, I didn't sleep well. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the figure standing under the streetlight. I promised myself Sunday I'd call the landlord, ask for security patrols, or install a camera. Maybe it was mental exhaustion. Fine, I could rationalize. But on Sunday evening, I returned home. My apartment looked the same. The hallway was empty. I hadn't told my landlord yet. I unpacked and ate something simple. Around 10 p.m., I sat in the living room, curtains opened slightly so I could see the street. I stared at the path I walked the night before. It seemed harmless. But then I heard a faint scrape outside. The window facing the street rattled ever so slightly. I held my breath and focused on the window. The blinds were tilted down. I saw movement beyond them, a shadow drifting past. I jumped up, inches from the glass, watching. The shadow stopped, then receded. It wasn't human-shaped exactly. It crouched, elongated. I stumbled back. I texted my friend, "Someone outside." They called me a second later. "Hey man, what's wrong?" My voice betrayed me. I told them. They told me to leave immediately. I nodded, though they couldn't see me. I walked to the door, gathering the little bag I'd packed. But as my hand reached the doorknob, I heard something else. A scratching at the other side of the window, subtle but unmistakable, like someone dragging a long fingernail down the glass. I turned slowly, terrified. Outside the window, pressed up against the glass, was the figure. Its head was cocked to the side, its fingers splayed wide, its face blank. I didn't see eyes, just darkness where eyes should be. It made no sound. Time froze. I raced out of the apartment, leaving lights on. I locked the door behind me and ran down the stairs, two at a time, all the way to the street. I didn't look back until I reached the sidewalk. I glanced up at the window. The curtains were open now. The figure was gone. I called a rideshare and told the driver to stay in sight until I got in. I didn't want to run again. When the car came, I got in and looked back at the building. The upstairs window was dark. I spent that night at my friend's place again. I didn't go home for a week. My apartment stayed dark the whole time. I had someone stay with me until the blackout passed. I installed a door sensor and a cheap camera on my porch, even though the landlord said there were no reports of break-ins. After a week, I walked home early in daylight, the sun still hanging low in the sky. The block looked different when light poured in. The fences didn't loom. The dark gap at the fence line looked just like broken wood. I told myself it was over. But late one night, 2 weeks after the first encounter, I came home at 11 p.m. I exited the building's foyer, key in hand, walking the last few steps to my door. The hallway smelled faintly of damp and old carpet, like every old apartment building. I paused at my door. Then I noticed something. On the floor near the window that looked out to the street was a dark smear, thumb-sized, darker than water. I knelt down and touched it. Cold. I pulled back. It looked like dried film. My heart pounded. I snapped a photo and left without entering. I didn't tell anyone. I stayed at a friend's again. A week later, I transferred apartments. Same building, but a different unit, farther from the street side. I asked the landlord quietly for a move. He didn't ask many questions. Night fell. I lay in bed, curtains drawn. Sleep came slowly. I dreamt of that figure walking in the street, its long limbs trailing shadows, tilting its head at me, silhouettes dancing in lamplight. I woke to a noise, 3 soft knocks at the adjacent wall. Not the door, the wall. I sat up, frozen. The knocks came again, 3 taps, pause, 1. Then silence. My phone buzzed. A message, unknown number. I see you. My breath froze. I didn't reply. The knocks never came again. I moved out of the building within a month. I sold or donated most of my furniture. I changed my route to work. I never walked home alone at night again without company or rideshare. And sometimes, late at night, when the wind whispers around street corners, I still feel the long limbs of that thing brushing past me in darkness, waiting. Story the end. The night was quiet in the suburbs of Dayton, Ohio. The kind of quiet that makes every little sound seem amplified. Streetlights flickered intermittently, their yellow glow stretching across empty sidewalks. Jenna had stayed at the library working on a research project, and by the time she finally stepped out into the night air, she felt the emptiness wrap around her like a cold blanket. Her shoes clicked on the pavement as she made her way down Elmwood neighborhood, the road she'd walked dozens of times before. But tonight, something felt off. As she passed the edge of the park, a breeze stirred the leaves of the oak trees, and in the underbrush, something shifted. Jenna froze mid-step. Her heart hammered. She told herself it was just a raccoon or a stray cat. She kept walking. Halfway home, she heard footsteps behind her. A slow, steady rhythm, matching her pace maybe a block behind. She forced herself not to look back, imagining that if she did, she'd meet nothing but empty walkway. But the footsteps didn't subside. They kept pace, just behind her. The rational part of her brain insisted she was imagining it, that the sound was her own shoes, bouncing an echo off the curb. The irrational part whispered, "Someone's there." She ducked into a small convenience store. The fluorescent lights buzzed louder than usual. She bought a soda, tried to steady her breathing. Glancing at the entrance, she saw a figure in a hooded sweatshirt near the door. The person stood motionless, staring out at the street. Jenna didn't make eye contact. She left quickly, stepping out into the dark again. The store's automatic door slid shut behind her. The night swallowed the light. She walked faster now, not running exactly, but determined. The footsteps resumed. They were closer. Jenna swallowed, trying to control her breath. She remembered the advice from self-defense classes, don't run unless you're sure you can win. So she kept walking, head high, pretending to be on a phone call. She put her phone to her ear and spoke a few words. Hey, I'm almost there, hoping the voice sounded natural enough. The footsteps increased. When she turned the corner onto Oak Street, she exited the well-lit residential area and entered a narrower lane between two rows of old houses. The houses looked abandoned. Windows dark, paint peeling, porches sagging. She regretted taking this shortcut. Her phone's light felt weak in that gloom. She noticed fresh graffiti painted across one house, an address that looked incorrect, as if marking something. A shadow detached itself from the deeper darkness at the end of the lane. It moved swiftly, almost silently. She froze again, the phone still to her ear, voice trailing off. The figure stepped into the dim pool of light beneath a street lamp. Tall, slim, wearing a hooded sweatshirt, hands in pockets. The hood was up. She couldn't see the face. The figure lifted a cell phone, pointed it toward her. Was it recording? She swallowed. She forced a smile, attempted to act unconcerned. Then the figure started walking toward her slowly. She switched her call to speaker so she could raise her other hand. She gripped the handle of her umbrella like a baton. The figure stopped when about 15 feet away. Jenna said loudly into her phone speaker, I'm just 5 minutes from home. I'll call you back. She pressed end. She stuffed the phone in her pocket and set a brisk pace again. The figure resumed walking behind her. Not just behind, sometimes to the side, staying within peripheral view. Jenna kept walking. The lane curved slightly, then ended at the back of a fenced yard. The street lamps were sparse here, and the darkness enveloped most of the path. Ahead, there was a small gate, creaking, leading to a back road. As she approached, the figure quickened. Suddenly, the figure emerged beside her, on the other side of the fence, stepping over the low boundary with ease. Her throat tightened. She didn't cry out. The figure matched her pace. Jenna slipped her hand into her jacket pocket, found her pepper spray. She held it lightly, ready. Why are you following me? She said, voice trembling, though she didn't speak aloud. She just inhaled sharply. The figure didn't answer. It paused again, watching her. Then it gave a small nod toward her. Jenna's focus flickered to the fence. They'd come over it. The figure now was inside the yard, no longer restricted. She turned and ran. The gate screeched as she passed through it. She sprinted down the back road, boots pounding the asphalt. She didn't look back until she reached the next street, Deerfield Lane, which was busier, though empty at this hour. She paused, breath ragged, looked in the back road's direction. No figure. Relief washed through her, but it was temporary. She still had about 10 minutes to home. She looked at her phone. It was 11:13 p.m. She texted her roommate, I'm being followed, taking extra route. Then she started again, choosing the main road with more light. Footsteps started again, but this time coming from a far distance, echoing between buildings. It sounded like two people this time. She kept moving, phone in hand, pretending to look at map. The noise grew. She began to glance sideways, up ahead, behind. Nothing visible, but the sounds. They would quicken whenever she quickened. She came to a bus stop shelter with a bench and sat for a moment, trying to steady her breathing. Her mind raced. Should she call the police? She considered dialing 911, but worried the dispatcher would tell her to hang up and keep going. She sent another text to her roommate with her live location pin. Then she felt a tap on her shoulder. She screamed and jumped up. A teenage boy stood behind her. Are you okay? He said. His voice shocked her, but he looked ordinary, nervous. She said yes, thanked him. He offered to walk with her. She accepted and explained she'd been feeling unsafe. He introduced himself as Marcus and said he lived nearby and could walk a block with her. They set off. Her pace slowed. Marcus walked a bit ahead to make sure she was safe. Jenna felt slightly better. A sense of safety returned, light though jittery. As they walked, she asked him if he'd been waiting there long. He said no. He just happened to be out for a late snack run. They approached her route's final stretch, a narrow path between parked cars and a high hedge that separated from an industrial lot. The streetlight at the end was failing. Its lamp flickered. Marcus kept walking until they reached the hedge. Jenna turned to him. Thanks, this is fine. The rest is just 5 minutes. He nodded, said goodnight, turned away. She watched him go. A small relief. She turned back to face the remaining path. As she stepped forward, the footsteps returned, but this time not behind her. They were ahead on the path. Two figures, vague silhouettes, emerged under the flickering lamp, just far enough to be hazy. She thought maybe they were walking away from her until one turned. The figure raised its hand and pointed at her. The finger was crooked, the gesture slow. The shadow on the hedge stretched long and grotesque. Jenna froze. She recognized both of the figures. They were the same two she had heard behind her, now ahead. Their bodies tilted strangely under the lamp's weak glow. One held a heavy object down by its side. The other had its hood off, face blank in shadow. They heard her stop. The one with the object turned and began advancing. She ran again, leaps faster, heart slamming. She burst out of the path and into a baseball field park, almost empty, but open. Her footsteps sounded hollow on the gravel. She sprinted across to the far side, hoping the would-be pursuers would hesitate because they didn't want light exposure. She made it to the lit side of the park. She pulled her phone out, ready to call, but got a message instead. "Are you okay? Where are you?" It was from Marcus. She typed back, "There are 2 men ahead. They're following me. I'm in the park." She heard a shout behind her, deep voice. She didn't stop. She didn't look back. The 2 figures climbed the fence that lined the field's far side. One of them jumped. The other squeezed through the chain link. They landed inside, now between her and her exit. Panic swept her. She looked at her phone. No signal. She tried again. It read no service. She cursed. The tall figure now was shouting, words unintelligible. Maybe threat, maybe warning. She turned and ran across the grass toward her car, parked at the edge of the field. She had parked a few blocks ahead. She burst through the gate and onto the sidewalk. The figures appeared behind the fence, one tapping the chain link like bars. She kept running. She reached the street and ran between parked cars, breathing like a racehorse. She glanced to the right and saw the 2 figures cross the road and head toward the same street that led to her house. She didn't wait. She kept going. She nearly tripped over a curb. Her umbrella flew out of her hand, but she kept running. Lights came ahead, her neighbor's porch light. She ran up to it and knocked hard on the door. The older woman who lived there blinked out from behind curtains. Jenna gasped the words, "Please let me in. Someone's after me." The woman fumbled and opened the door. Jenna stumbled past into the warmth and safety of the lit living room. The neighbor locked the door and fetched a phone. Jenna called 911 and reported the 2 men following her, now heads toward her street. The neighbor handed her a glass of water. She shivered. She watched the front window as the neighbor called the police. Outside, the streetlight glowed weakly. Within minutes, sirens in the distance. The neighbor had patted Jenna's back. Jenna stood by the window, watching but seeing nothing. The 2 figures had vanished. The police arrived. They searched the area but found no one. They checked CCTV from nearby convenience stores and school cameras. They pulled up an image of 2 hooded men walking purposefully down Oak Street at 11:10 p.m., one carrying what looked like a pipe or rod. They couldn't identify faces. Jenna gave a statement. She left with the police officer, who escorted her back to her own house and made sure she was safe. Once inside, she bolted the doors and leaned against the wall, adrenaline still coursing. The officer told her it would be wise to adjust her route, change times, call if she ever felt followed. Days afterward, Jenna found she couldn't walk alone at night without anxiety. She avoided the Elmwood Lane and the narrow backyard path. She installed motion sensor lights outside her house. She subscribed to personal safety apps that alert contacts with location. Every time the phone rang late at night, her stomach clenched. Weeks later, Jenna received the video clip from one of the convenience stores. 2 men walking in darkness. One looking at the camera for a moment. Face hoods. When the light flickered, the one glanced back at the street with her in it. That image haunted her nights. Eventually she returned to walking, though never the same route. The memory of those 2 figures advancing under a flickering lamp pointing toward her never left. She sometimes wonders what they would have done if she hadn't reached the neighbor's door. The quiet suburban streets grew sinister after that night. Every shadow felt like the same bodies, every footstep behind her a threat. Many nights she sleeps with the light on, umbrella by the door, phone ready. She often imagines hearing footsteps outside the window or a figure in the bushes near the fence between her yard and the empty lot. She reminds herself she was lucky. Others aren't. She tells the story quietly to friends so they'll remember. You might be in a familiar place, late hour in a place you've walked thousands of times, and that counts for nothing when someone chooses to follow you. The night is still. The streetlights flicker. Even now, when she passes that lane, she clutches her pepper spray. Because sometimes the darkest horror isn't in ghost stories. It's watching footsteps in the dark, realizing you're not alone. Story the end. The night air was colder than I expected for early October. I remember checking my phone before I left the restaurant, 11:42 p.m. The place had closed down almost an hour earlier, but my coworkers and I stayed back, talking and cleaning up after the dinner rush. It was one of those small, family-run diners in a quiet part of upstate New York. I'd been working there for about 6 months while saving up for college, and that night was just another late shift. The problem started because my car wouldn't start. The battery was dead. I'd left my headlights on again, which I had a bad habit of doing. My coworker, Lisa, offered me a ride, but she lived in the opposite direction, and I didn't want to make her drive 30 minutes out of her way when her baby was home with her husband. I told her I'd just walk. It was only about a mile and a half down the main road to my apartment. I'd done it before. It wasn't my favorite thing to do, but it wasn't unusual. The town was quiet, small, and the streets were usually empty at that hour. When I stepped out of the diner, I noticed how still it was. The only sound was the buzzing of the streetlight near the corner. One of the bulbs flickered every few seconds, casting long, jerky shadows across the cracked pavement. I zipped my jacket, stuffed my hands into my pockets, and started walking. The road back to my apartment was mostly straight, lined with old oak trees and a few scattered houses. It was one of those roads that always felt like it should have been busier, wide enough for 2 lanes, but empty except for the occasional car. That night, though, there were no cars at all. Not one. I could hear my shoes scuffing against the pavement, the faint crunch of fallen leaves. I tried to play some music on my phone to fill the silence, but my battery was down to 2% and I needed the flashlight. I decided it was better to walk in the dark than risk being stranded with no light. About 5 minutes in, I passed the last of the houses. After that, the road stretched through a wooded area before reaching the small cluster of buildings near my apartment. It wasn't exactly the woods, more like a strip of trees and brush that separated one part of town from another. Still, once you entered that stretch, the streetlights became fewer, and the dark seemed thicker. I'd always felt uneasy walking that section. Even during the day, it had a strange quiet to it. At night, it was worse. I tried to keep my eyes on the faint circle of light ahead of me, but I couldn't help glancing into the trees every few steps. The branches swayed slightly in the breeze, and occasionally I'd hear something rustle, probably an animal. Still, my pulse picked up. About halfway through, I heard the sound of footsteps behind me. It wasn't loud, more like a soft, rhythmic tapping. I slowed down, thinking maybe someone else was walking home too. But when I stopped, the sound stopped. I turned around, shining my phone's flashlight down the empty road. Nothing. The beam lit up a patch of cracked asphalt and the trunk of a tree, but no one was there. I told myself it was probably an echo. The road had those uneven surfaces that sometimes bounced sound weirdly. I started walking again, this time faster. After a few steps, the tapping came back. Tap, tap, tap. It matched my pace for a while, like footsteps trying to mimic mine. When I stopped again, the sound stopped. I turned and shined the light back again, sweeping it slowly across the road and into the trees. My heart thudded so hard I could hear it in my ears. Still nothing. I thought about calling someone, maybe Lisa, but my phone was already at 1%. I didn't want to waste the battery. I figured if something was actually wrong, I'd need it later. I walked faster. The sound came back again. This time it wasn't footsteps. It was more like the faint dragging of something across the pavement. A shoe maybe, or something heavier. It sent a chill down my spine. I looked over my shoulder again, but my flashlight flickered out. Dead battery. Now, Now I was standing there in the middle of the road, surrounded by trees and darkness so deep I couldn't see more than a few feet ahead. I tried to blink my eyes to adjust, but all I saw were faint outlines, the white line in the road, the shape of branches above me. The silence pressed down, thick and heavy. I took a slow breath and started walking again, this time staying close to the middle of the road. My ears strained for any sound. That's when I heard it again. Not behind me this time, but from the side, from the trees. It was a whisper, low, almost too soft to make out. My name, Ryan. It was clear as day, like someone standing just a few feet away had said it. I froze. My skin prickled all over, my breath caught in my throat. Ryan. The voice came again from a different direction, this time ahead of me. I stumbled back, my hands shaking, my throat dry. I couldn't make sense of it. It didn't sound like anyone I knew. It wasn't Lisa or my boss or anyone from work. It was slow, drawn out, the kind of voice that didn't sound quite human. I told myself it was the wind. It had to be. The trees moved, making strange sounds. I started walking again, faster this time, my steps loud and uneven. Then I heard something move, a quick rustle from the left side of the road, then a sharp crack of a twig. I turned my head, trying to see through the dark, but there was nothing. Another sound came from the opposite side, heavier this time, like someone stepping on gravel. "Hello?" I called out, my voice shaking. "Who's there?" No answer. I took out my phone again, even though I knew it was dead. I tried turning it on, but the screen stayed black. For a few seconds, the woods went completely silent again. Then I heard the dragging sound return. Slow. Closer. I started running. I don't know how long I ran for. Maybe a minute, maybe 5. The air burned in my lungs and I could barely see where I was going. The road curved slightly and I nearly tripped over a pothole. I glanced back once, but the darkness behind me looked the same as before. Empty. Still, I felt it. That feeling of being watched, of something moving just out of sight. Finally, I saw the faint orange glow of a streetlight ahead, the start of the next neighborhood. Relief washed over me. I slowed down, breathing hard, my chest tight. But then I noticed something strange. The streetlight was flickering, and underneath it there was a shape. At first, I thought it was a person, tall, standing perfectly still. But as I got closer, I realized something was off. The shape wasn't quite human. The proportions were wrong, too thin, too long. I stopped walking, my heart hammering. The figure didn't move. It just stood there, at the edge of the light, facing me. I called out again, "Hey, you okay?" No response. I took a step closer, then another. The figure shifted slightly, and I realized with horror that it wasn't facing me. It had no face at all. Just a dark, featureless head tilted slightly to one side. I turned and bolted. I didn't look back this time. I just ran until I reached the edge of town, until I could see the gas station near my apartment complex. When I finally made it there, I burst inside, startling the clerk behind the counter. He looked at me like I was crazy, sweating, shaking, gasping for air. "Hey man, you okay?" he asked. I turned around to look out the glass door, half expecting to see something following me. But the road outside was empty. I told him I thought someone was following me, maybe trying to mess with me. He offered to call the police, but I told him no. I didn't know what to say. What was I supposed to tell them? That something without a face followed me through the woods? I stayed in the gas station for almost an hour, just staring out the window. No one passed by. No cars, no people. When I finally worked up the nerve to leave, I walked the short distance to my apartment, my legs still trembling. I locked the door, checked every window twice, then sat down on the couch and tried to calm myself. That night, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that shape under the flickering light. The next morning, I went outside to check on my car, figuring I'd try to jump-start it. But when I got to the parking lot behind the diner, something stopped me cold. On the hood of my car were 3 long, thin scratches, parallel, perfectly straight. They weren't there before. I told myself it could have been anything. A branch, an animal, a prank. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. Over the next few days, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had followed me home. At night, I'd hear noises outside my window. Soft, scraping sounds, sometimes faint tapping on the glass. I lived on the 2nd floor. One night, about a week later, I woke up around 3 a.m. to a sound that froze me where I lay. Someone was whispering my name again. Ryan. It came from the window. I turned my head slowly. The blinds were half open, and through the small gap I could see part of the streetlight outside. But there was something else there, a shadow pressed against the glass. It was tall, just like before, and even though I couldn't see its face, I knew it was looking right at me. I didn't move, I just stared, paralyzed. The whisper came again, softer this time. "Ryan?" I blinked, and it was gone. When I finally got the courage to check the window, there was nothing there. But on the outside of the glass were three faint marks, like long fingers had pressed against it. That was the last night I slept there. I packed my things the next morning and moved in with my cousin across town. I never went back to that apartment or that diner. It's been 2 years since then. I don't talk about it much because every time I do, something strange happens. Once, after telling the story to a friend, I got a call from an unknown number late that night. When I answered, there was no one on the other end, just breathing, slow and heavy. Last week, I thought I saw someone standing under the streetlight near my new place. Same build, same stillness. I tried not to look, but as I walked inside, I heard it again, faint, almost drowned out by the wind. Ryan. Story, the end. It was just after 11:30 on a cool October night in 2017 when I found myself walking home alone from my friend's apartment in a small town outside of Indianapolis. I had been at her place watching a movie, and I remember debating whether to stay the night or walk back. It wasn't a long distance, about 20 minutes on foot, but my car was parked closer to my apartment, and I didn't feel like leaving it overnight. The air was crisp, the kind that carried the faint smell of damp leaves and smoke from fireplaces. I pulled my hoodie tighter and started down the dimly lit street, telling myself that I'd be fine. The first few blocks were quiet. Houses sat close together, their porches glowing with yellow light. A dog barked somewhere in the distance, and a train horn echoed faintly far off to the east. The rhythm of my sneakers against the sidewalk mixed with the rustle of wind through the trees. It was peaceful, almost calming, and I remember thinking how silly it was that people were so afraid of walking alone at night. I wasn't in the city anymore. This was a sleepy town where people left their doors unlocked and still waved to strangers. After I passed the gas station on the corner, the streetlights became farther apart. I turned onto Maple Avenue, a long stretch that cut through an older neighborhood with fewer houses and more vacant lots. My phone battery had died about 10 minutes before, so I couldn't use it as a flashlight or for music. That was fine, I told myself. I'd grown up around here. I knew these streets. But the silence began to feel heavier. Every time I passed under a streetlight, I could hear the buzz of the bulb, followed by an emptiness when I stepped into the shadow again. I tried to focus on the sound of my footsteps, but they seemed to echo louder than they should have. The further I went, the more aware I became of how alone I was. I hadn't seen a single car in 10 minutes. Halfway down the block, I noticed movement across the street. It was just a flicker at first, something shifting near the edge of a yard. I slowed down, squinting, but saw nothing except a tall oak tree and the dark outline of a trash can. I told myself it was probably a raccoon or a stray cat. Still, I felt my pulse quicken. I kept walking, faster this time. When I reached the end of Maple, I turned onto a side road called Brewer Street. It was narrower with no sidewalks, and only every other streetlight was working. The houses were older here, some boarded up, some with overgrown yards. I'd always hated this stretch, even during the day. It had that forgotten feeling, like a place time had skipped. I was about halfway down Brewer when I heard it. A footstep that wasn't mine. It came from behind me, faint but distinct, slow, deliberate, and slightly dragging. I froze mid-step. The sound stopped too. I turned, scanning the shadows behind me. Nothing, just the dim orange glow of a faraway light and the rustle of leaves. I waited a moment, listening. Then I told myself I was imagining things. Maybe it had been my shoe scuffing the pavement or a branch shifting in the wind. I turned back and started walking again. Another step, definitely not mine. My stomach tightened. I didn't want to turn around again. The sound came in rhythm with mine, but just a second too late, like someone matching my pace. I quickened my steps, and the sound quickened too. That's when the reality hit me. It wasn't in my head. Someone was behind me. I broke into a brisk walk, forcing myself not to run. I remembered reading that running can trigger pursuit if someone really is following you. I glanced to my left, searching for houses with lights on, but most of them were dark. The one that wasn't had its curtains drawn, another dragging step. Closer. I stopped suddenly and spun around. Hey! I shouted into the dark. My voice echoed down the empty street. Nothing moved. The wind blew a few dead leaves past me. I felt ridiculous, standing there yelling at nothing. But then I saw it. Just for a split second. Between two trees across the street, there was a shape. Human. Tall. Motionless. It didn't step forward or backward. It just stood there like it was watching me. My throat went dry. Who's there? I called again, trying to sound confident, but my voice cracked halfway through. No response. The figure didn't move. I took a step back, keeping my eyes locked on it. Then a car approached from down the street. Its headlights swept over the trees, and the shape vanished. There was nothing there when the lights passed. I didn't know if it had ducked away or if my eyes had been playing tricks on me, but my hands were shaking. When the car passed, I used its taillights as a brief comfort and kept walking fast. My heart thudded in my chest. I told myself I'd cut through the park at the end of Brewer. It was a shortcut, and there were streetlights around the playground. From there, I'd only be 5 minutes from my apartment. The park sat quiet under the yellow glow of old lamps. The swings creaked softly in the breeze, and fallen leaves crunched under my shoes as I crossed the small parking lot. The moment I stepped onto the walking path, I heard it again, that same dragging step. Only now, it sounded closer. I turned sharply and saw a shadow move near the trees lining the park's edge. It was definitely human-shaped this time, and it ducked out of view the moment I looked. That was enough for me. I started running. The path curved toward the playground, and I sprinted under the streetlights, trying to keep to the open. My breath came out in sharp gasps. Behind me, I heard footsteps again, this time faster, heavier, keeping up with me. I didn't dare look back. I veered toward the street, planning to cut across the park's exit and head for the main road. I could see the glow of traffic lights ahead, maybe 2 blocks away. I ran harder than I ever had before. But just as I reached the gate at the park's edge, I heard something that made my blood run cold. A low whisper. It came from the darkness behind me. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was unmistakably human. It wasn't a shout, it wasn't an echo. It was a voice close enough that I felt it vibrate in my ears. I turned and saw a man step out from behind one of the trees. He was tall and thin, wearing a dark hoodie with the hood up, his face half hidden in shadow. His clothes looked dirty, and his shoes made that same dragging sound I'd been hearing. He didn't move toward me at first. He just stood there, head tilted slightly to one side, watching me. My heart pounded so hard I thought I might faint. "What do you want?" I managed to choke out. No answer. He took one slow step forward. That was all it took. I bolted out of the park, nearly tripping over the curb. I didn't stop running until I reached the intersection near my apartment complex. The streetlights there were bright, and a few cars were passing by. I stopped under the light, trying to catch my breath, my hands trembling so violently I dropped my keys. I turned back toward the park. The man was standing at the entrance, halfway hidden behind the gate, just staring. Even from that distance, I could feel his eyes on me. He didn't move closer, didn't chase me, just stood there like he was making sure I saw him. Then, without a word, he turned and walked back into the darkness of the park. I didn't wait another second. I sprinted the rest of the way to my apartment, fumbled with the lock, and slammed the door behind me. I double-locked it, then pulled the blinds shut and turned on every light in the place. For hours, I couldn't calm down. I sat on my couch, staring at the door, replaying everything in my head. What scared me the most wasn't that he'd followed me. It was how deliberate it had felt. The way he'd stayed just far enough away, matching my pace, making sure I knew he was there. That kind of patience wasn't random. The next morning, I called the police. They sent an officer to take a statement, and I told him everything. What I'd seen, what I'd heard, even where the man had been standing. He listened, nodded, and said he'd have someone patrol the area for the next few nights. But he also told me that unless I could describe the guy's face, or unless he did something overtly threatening, there wasn't much they could do. That didn't make me feel any better. For a few nights, I avoided walking after dark altogether. I started parking closer to my building and taking a different route to work. I even bought a small can of pepper spray to keep in my jacket pocket. Slowly, I convinced myself it had been a one-time thing. Maybe the guy was homeless. Maybe he was high or just wandering. There were dozens of ways to rationalize it. A week passed, then two. I started to feel normal again, until one night in early November. It was around midnight when I was sitting on my couch watching TV. The blinds were still drawn, but I heard something faint through the glass, a sound that made my skin crawl instantly. A slow, dragging step. It came from right outside my window. My stomach dropped. I muted the TV and sat perfectly still. Another step. Closer. I could hear the gravel crunch under the weight. My apartment was on the first floor, facing a narrow alley that ran behind the building. Hardly anyone ever used it. I reached for my phone and dialed 911, whispering to the operator what was happening. As I was talking, I heard a soft tap on the glass, then another, like someone gently testing it with their fingers. I froze, staring at the closed blinds. I didn't want to move, didn't want to draw attention. The operator told me to stay quiet, that officers were on their way. Then the tapping stopped. For about 30 seconds, there was silence. Then I heard it, the whisper again. Closer this time, right outside the window. It wasn't words I could make out, just a low murmur, like he was talking to himself. The sound moved toward the edge of the window, then faded. I didn't dare look. When the police finally arrived, they searched the alley, but found no one. Just footprints, muddy, uneven, leading from the street up to my window and then back toward the park. That was the last night I stayed in that apartment. I packed up within the week and moved to a different town. Even now, years later, I still think about it every time I walk alone at night. I still hear the sound sometimes, the faint drag of a footstep behind me, and I can't help but look back, half expecting to see that tall figure in the shadows. The police never found him. They said the footprints didn't match any local record. A few months later, there were reports of a woman being followed near the same park. She described a man in a dark hoodie, tall, silent, and always keeping his distance. Some nights I wonder if he's still out there, walking the same streets, waiting for someone else to be foolish enough to think it's safe to walk alone. Story the end. The streetlights flickered as I stepped off the bus, the final route of the night slowing to a stop just past the old warehouse district. The air was thin and cold, biting at the edges of my coat, my breath caught in puffs of mist. I glanced at my phone. 3:14 a.m. Better hurry home, I thought. The sidewalks were nearly empty, save for a stray shopping cart rolling in the breeze and abandoned fast food bags drifting aimlessly. I had been visiting a friend across town, and the ride home was the only part I wasn't eager about. This stretch of road always felt off. It was one of those corridors where broken streetlights cast long shadows, where the hum of distant traffic seemed distant indeed, and where the hum of insects had already dwindled. I began walking. The tiles cracked beneath my feet. My boots echoed softly on the deserted pavement. Ahead, an old building loomed, its windows dark, its sign faded, Broadway Manufacturing. Once it had roared with activity, but now it stood silent, a hulking shell waiting for demolition or collapse. For some reason, I quickened my pace. A car crept past, radiator humming, its headlights briefly illuminating a man standing at the corner. I saw him, wearing a gray hoodie, hands in his pockets. He disappeared into shadow before I could look closer. My heart skipped. I told myself it was nothing. Probably someone waiting for the bus or just passing through. I kept my phone in hand, though it showed no signal. Battery low. Great. I thought about calling someone, but figured the walk was only 10 minutes. I'd be home soon. Then I heard a scraping. Behind me, I turned. Nothing, just the dark alley between the warehouse and another building, garbage cans upturned, rats scurrying away. I exhaled, probably just that. But the scraping came again, rhythmic, metal dragging across concrete, a sound that shouldn't exist at this hour. One footstep, two. I turned my head again. There. Something moving behind stacked pallets. I glanced at my phone again. 8% battery, no signal. I tucked it away, forced my face into neutrality, and walked on. My hands felt cold, even though I zipped my coat tight. Then, about 50 feet ahead, a figure appeared in the streetlight's weak glow. Man in a dark coat, hat low, standing absolutely still, watching me. He didn't move as I walked closer. My pace slowed even more. Who the hell is that? Then I noticed he was holding something. A long, thin object, maybe a metal rod, maybe a crowbar. My stomach churned. I considered crossing the street, but there was no other sidewalk. So I kept walking, eyes fixed ahead, face composed. The man didn't flinch. I quickened my pace again. The rod clinked quietly as he adjusted his grip. Every time my foot hit the pavement, I heard the sound of fear tick-tocking inside me. The building's windows, dark and broken, were silent watchers. I passed the man, my heart hammered inside my ribs. He didn't move. I exhaled, maybe he was just waiting for someone or some weird thing. But the gesture of his head as I walked by made me raise my head. He nodded. I nodded back, because what else? And then I turned the corner. My relief was immediate. Just turns, just past the brick facade, then left, then right. My key was on the hook in my hand. I reached the porch of my apartment building, pressed the buzzer. The door buzzed. I darted inside, pressed the inner door closed behind me. I leaned against it, breath ragged, silent as the lobby. The security camera light flickered low. I pressed my key in the lock and heard the silence beyond it. Inside, the hallway was dim. I pressed the elevator button. Going down. The doors closed. I pressed floor 1. As the elevator shuddered, my mind raced. What was that man? Why did he nod? Why was he holding a rod? Had I imagined it? This building wasn't in a high-crime area, but then at 3 a.m., everything feels vulnerable. At home, I locked the deadbolt, locked the chain, dropped my bag. The battery on my phone died with an abrupt chirp. Of course it did. I threw it on the couch, sat for a minute, staring at the dark windows, listening. My breathing slowed. It's fine. You're safe now. You're home. Period. But sleep wouldn't come. My heart still pounded. I kept hearing footsteps, like slow footfalls in the hallway outside, across the vinyl floor, a soft drag, plastic dragging across tile. I forced myself to move around, drink water, check windows. Nothing. Eventually, I drifted to sleep, or what I called sleep. Dreamless, but uneasy. I woke an hour later sweating. The clock read 5:27 a.m. Sunrise wasn't yet. The city still quiet, but daylight creeping. I rose to look outside. The street was empty. The sidewalk silent. No sign of the man. I told myself I'd call security in my building, mention the odd man at 3 a.m., though I knew they'd shrug. Days passed normally. Work, errands, normal. But I found myself glancing at street corners, checking shadows. For the first week, I stayed inside past dark, took rides whenever I could. But life has to continue. I had to get to the bus stop, to meet friends, to live. One evening, about 2 weeks later, I left work late. Again. The hour, 2:48 a.m., I walked down the same route, the same cracked sidewalk, the same warehouse district. The streetlight bulbs were flickering even more. I passed the warehouse again, the spot where I first heard the scraping. My phone showed no service. Great. I walked, footsteps echoing. The air colder now, a wind slicing through. I heard the scraping again, metal against concrete. My heart jumped. I stopped. Head turned, empty alley, but there. The pallets, the garbage cans, a silhouette behind them. I froze. My body screamed, run, but my mind said, observe. Slowly, I stepped backward, but the foot gave a loud crunch on a small piece of litter. The silhouette snapped upright. The figure emerged. The same man in the dark coat and hat, rod in hand. He took a step. I took 2 steps back. Hey, I whispered, though I doubted heard. Hey, man. He didn't reply. He came into light, face pale, features harsh, eyes locked on me. The rod raised slightly. I could see rust on it. Blood, maybe old rust. I didn't run. I couldn't. Fear froze me. He came closer, closer again. I forced myself to take 1 step back. My foot hit the curb, stumbling. I almost fell. He smiled, slow and wide. I turned and ran down the street, feet pounding, heart hammering. The roar of traffic somewhere distant. He followed. I heard his footsteps behind me, soft at first, then louder, then sync with mine. My head whipped around. He was gaining. I reached a corner, the bus stop, empty at this hour. No bus. I sprinted across the street, into the station entrance. Card swiped, lights overhead. He came into the doorway. I slammed the button for the escalator. It moved. I sprinted upward, glancing back. He stopped at the bottom, watching me, rod in hand. I didn't stop until I reached the street above. Light. More people. Security cameras. I swore I glanced back once more. He was gone. Vanished into the night. I didn't call the police. Who would believe me anyway? Late night, no witnesses, a shadow with a rod. Probably I'd sound paranoid. But I didn't walk that route again. Instead, I took the cab. Always. For the rest of the month. Then one night I got complacent. I thought, What are the odds I run into him again? I decided to brave the walk. It was midnight. I was only 2 blocks from home. Why not? I passed the warehouse district once more. The streetlights flickered. I kept my earbuds in, listening to something soothing to stay calm. I typed a message, almost home, be there soon. I didn't hit send. The scraping came again. Behind me, I stopped, head turning, empty path. The rod, the shape, he emerged. No hat this time, hair long, stringy, face unshaven, eyes wild, pupils huge. His coat was torn, the rod heavier looking, maybe a pipe. I locked eyes with him. He didn't speak. He raised the rod, then lowered it, then tilted his head, like a dog waiting. I exhaled and turned the other way. He followed. I ran. My phone in hand, the whole time, screen lit but no signal. I reached my building, the buzzer. I fumbled. Then on the floor by the door, a small puddle of red. Fresh. I looked up. He was still outside, staring. I slammed the door, locked everything. My phone rang. It was my friend calling. I answered. I didn't explain. I sat on the couch shaking for hours, watching the door. Dawn broke. I finally told management. They said they'd review camera footage. They never called back. For weeks, nothing. Then one day I found a note slid under my apartment door. Plain white paper, bold black text in messy handwriting. You can't hide. No name, no threat beyond that. My hair stood on end. I had the building security look at the hallways. Nothing. No one lingered on camera. The note, however, it came in. I moved. I didn't stay there. I found a place on the other side of town in a well-lit area, a building with a doorman and lots of residents, even at night. I changed my job schedule when possible, changed the route home, took the longer walk, but in crowds. Months later, the image of him in the dark coat, the rod in hand, nodding at me in the weak streetlight, still flashes through my mind. I still walk sometimes alone, late at night, but I keep my eyes on the street corners, my phone ready, my cab app open. Because I know someone could be watching. Waiting, story the end. I arrived in the small town of Cedar Hills just after 7 at night. The sun had already dipped behind the rolling hills, casting long shadows across the quiet streets. I had moved there a week ago for a job at the local hardware store. Just one of those new starts you tell yourself you'll make when life elsewhere gets messy. Tonight I left the store late, locking up the windows and counting the keys in my pocket. The cashier had said, "Drive safe now," with that kindly smile you get in places where folks still believe someone isn't out to get you. I nodded and wandered out onto the sidewalk. The streetlights were spaced far apart here. Many flickered. Some didn't light at all. A soft wind rustled dried leaves along curbs, and I pulled my jacket tighter around me. My destination was my little rented bungalow just 3 blocks away in the older part of town. I felt safe enough. 3 blocks. No big deal. A normal stroll after work. Plenty of people lived out late here. Townfolk said the crime rate was basically nil. As I walked, I passed old maples with their blackened branches reaching out into the dimness. The houses looked abandoned, peeling paint, shuttered windows. But in one house I caught light behind torn curtains. For an instant, I thought I saw someone standing there, watching, motionless. I shook it off and kept walking. My phone in my pocket buzzed, text from a coworker checking I'd heard about tomorrow's early shift meeting. I thumbed it and kept going. That's when a car rolled by, its headlights sweeping past me, illuminating the crooked sidewalk ahead. It felt like the car paused too long, like their headlights held me in their glare. I glanced over my shoulder and saw it turn around. Headlamps pointed back at me, then it drove off. Too long. I took a deep breath. Nothing strange. I told myself, just rural roads and weird drivers. About halfway home, the wind picked up. The streetlights ahead sputtered. One flickered out just as I took a step underneath. Suddenly, it was dark. A wave of isolation hit me. 3 blocks now felt miles. My jacket sleeves felt heavy. My heart beat a little faster. Then I heard it. A rustling behind the hedge that lined the sidewalk. At first, I thought a stray dog or raccoon, but the rustle repeated, slow, deliberate. I paused and looked around. Nothing but darkness and leaves. I turned and kept walking, my shoes crunching leaves. Twice I glanced behind, but there was no one. That comforted me a little. I told myself again, it's okay. You're fine. The pavement ended, and then I entered the stretch of road with no houses on one side, just woods, the trees pressing close. The car had gone. The only sound was the wind and my footsteps. Then I heard footsteps behind me. Mine had a steady rhythm, left, right, left, right. The steps behind matched, left, right. They fell in sync, too close. My knees felt weak. I stopped, paused, held my breath. The footsteps did too, just behind me, silent for a long moment. I turned and scanned the darkness. Still nothing, but I smelled something. Damp earth, pine, and something else, metallic, sharp. My throat went dry. I resumed walking, slightly faster. The footsteps resumed at the same pace. Closer. I broke into a light jog. The footsteps picked up. I dared a glance. Nothing but the forest edge. No one visible. The streetlight ahead dimly lit the ground. I ran forward, took the turn onto the next street. My bungalow was now just 1 block away, or so I thought. The footsteps stopped. I slowed to a cautious walk, heart pounding. I peeked behind again. No one. The rustling hedge earlier seemed ridiculous now. My imagination, maybe. I exhaled and told myself I'd call a friend when I reached home. Opened the door, safe inside. I reached the front step of the bungalow. The porch light was out. I flicked the switch. Nothing. The darkness of the porch hit me like a wave. I fumbled for my keys. As I searched, I heard a whisper, soft, just beyond the door. Hello. I froze. The key dropped from my fingers. Hello, I said, voice low. Silence. I bent down, picked up the key. My hands trembled as I inserted it. The lock clicked. I swung the door open and flicked the light switch inside. Nothing. I shut the door behind me, locked it, slid the deadbolt. Light still nothing. I made for the fuse box and flipped the switch. That didn't help. In the dim light of the street lamp outside through the window, I could make out an unfamiliar shape in the living room. At first I thought it was a chair. Something moved. I froze. The door I'd just entered from clicked again. Someone trying the handle, maybe? I crept toward the door, saw the handle wiggle. Locked. I exhaled. Then the shape shifted. It stood. A tall figure, slender, in dark clothes, face obscured by a hood. I gasped, stumbled backward. The figure raised an arm, pointed directly at me. My blood went cold. I backed up to the wall. No phone ringing, no noise, but the hum of the outside night. At that moment, the porch light outside blinked and went off. Darkness enveloped everything. The figure advanced a few paces. I fled across the living room, smashed the window. Cold night air rushed in. I leapt through, landed on the grass, and scrambled to my feet. I ran out onto the road, my bare feet numb on the cold pavement. I spun around. The house's front door burst open, and the figure emerged, gliding across the lawn. I took off into the darkness, heart in my throat. I ran down the street blindly, not sure which direction would lead somewhere populated. I heard footsteps behind me, soft and steady, keeping pace. I slowed, stopped. The footsteps stopped. I ducked into a driveway, crouched behind a parked car, trembling. After a few minutes, I peeked. No movement. I made my way to the neighbor's porch, a house with warm lights. I rang the bell as loudly as I could. A gentle woman in her 60s opened. I stumbled in, locked the door behind me. She asked what happened. I shook uncontrollably. She called 911. I sat in her living room, watching out the window. Patrol car arrived. They knocked on my door. I pointed across to my house. I saw them come out. They searched. No one found. That night I didn't sleep. The fear followed me even in daylight. I decided I had to move. But that same night I heard scratching on my bedroom window at 2 a.m., light tapping like fingernails. I looked up. Nothing. Just darkness. I packed fast the next morning and left town. I thought I saw that figure again as I drove out past the forest edge, standing silent among trees, facing the road. I didn't stop. I drove until I couldn't see his silhouette. Weeks later, I still wake in the dark, thinking I hear footsteps matching mine just behind me, whispering. A shadow standing just inside the trees at the edge of streetlights. I refuse to walk alone after dark. Story the end. I trudged down the cracked sidewalk, the street lamps flickering above me, casting weak halos of light that barely kept the darkness at bay. It was well past midnight, and the only other sign of life was the dog a few blocks ahead, wandering the street with caution, its ears swiveling as though expecting something to crawl out from the shadows. I had left my apartment building because I couldn't sleep. My mind was buzzing with thoughts I needed to walk off. I'd told myself I'd just go for a quick loop, down Maple Street to the park, around the perimeter, and then back home. But as the minutes slipped by and the houses cleared out, the city became less comforting and more like something else entirely. I passed the old Richardson house on Maple, its windows boarded, the yard overgrown, and something made me pause. I was almost past it, but turned around, half expecting someone to step out from behind the boards. There was nothing but darkness. I heard the crunch of gravel. I froze. The sound came again. I looked around but saw only my own breath visible in the cold air. The dog had vanished. I decided I was being silly. Streetlights above, locked houses on either side. I was safe. Just keep walking. Keep moving. My steps echoed in the silence. My footfalls on the sidewalk were a metronome in this otherworldly quiet. I noticed the air had grown colder, the kind of cold that shoots into bones rather than just brushed against bare skin. I pulled my jacket a little tighter. At the corner by Willow Drive, I saw a figure standing under the yellow glow of a streetlight, a man in a dark coat with his head bowed. He looked normal at first glance, just someone waiting for something. Then I realized his head was completely still, bowed, and his coat was too long, all the way past his knees. I felt my pulse quicken. I was about 20 feet from him. I slowed. I could have passed him, gave him a nod, but something kept me from it, a wave of instinct that said, "Don't go near." I kept my distance and veered across the street, crossing to the other side so I wouldn't walk under the same light. The man remained where he was, still paused, his head bowed as though mourning. I quickened my pace, eager to leave his presence behind me. I wasn't sure why he bothered me so much. Maybe it was the sheer stillness of him, void of motion, making him seem less human and more statue. His coat flapped slightly in the breeze. I dared to glance back. His head lifted slowly and turned toward me. I caught the glint of his eyes, dark, reflecting the lamp above. I turned away and sprinted the next block. I reached the park entrance, a gate standing open wide, the turf looming under the shadow of trees. The park in daylight was peaceful. At night it resembled a bowl of blackness, except for the path I was on. The entrance light was dim, and the rest was opaque dark, trees forming dark towers overhead. I slowed again, hearing a branch snap behind me. I didn't spin around. My own steps sounded too loud. I told myself it was nothing, just the wind or a critter. I walked under the arching limbs into the park, staying on the paved path. There were benches and trash cans, all forgotten in the late hour. I came to a bench near a pond. Its surface rippled as though something disturbed the water beneath. Maybe a turtle, maybe a frog. I sat for a moment, breathing in, trying to calm the adrenaline in my chest. The night felt alive, watching. The sound of footsteps brought me upright. They were slow, deliberate, coming from my left along the path. I strained to see through the blackout of the trees. A shape appeared. A woman. Her dress long, pale even in the dim light, hair long and dark like spilled ink. She seemed to float rather than walk, her feet barely touching the earth. But it was the unnatural tilt of her head that really stopped me. She looked ahead, then glided toward me. I backed up a few steps, adrenaline clearing the fog. She passed me at 4 or 5 feet away, her eyes empty yet locked on mine. My breath caught. She didn't say anything. I heard no sound of fabric rustling, no crunch underfoot. The moment she passed, the hair whipped around her face, and the figure vanished into the darkness ahead like mist. I swallowed. The night seemed to hold its breath after she moved on. My heart hammered. Why had she felt wrong? I ran from the bench, turning back toward the sidewalk exit. But as I approached the gate I'd entered through, the metal latch moved. Not unlocked. Moved as if by something's hand. I froze. The gate creaked as it swung open an inch, then stopped. I backed away, startled. My phone came out. The screen lit up as I checked the time, 12:39 a.m. I dropped the phone down, hearing it click. My breathing was loud, uneven. I told myself there was a perfectly plausible explanation. Creaky hinge, wind, nothing supernatural. I focused on the path, on putting one foot in front of the other until I reached the exit. Beyond the gate, I paused. The streetlights looked like midday compared to the oppressive darkness I left behind. I exhaled. The feeling of being watched receded. I told myself I'd just go the rest of the way home and forget this. But the flicker in a nearby window pulled me out of my mental relief. Across the street, from the second-floor window of a house, I saw movement. Someone standing just behind the curtain, watching me. I braced. The motion stopped and the curtain dropped. I walked toward the door of my apartment building faster. As I reached the front steps, I heard something behind me. Soft footsteps. My keys rattled as I unlocked the door. I glanced back. The man in the long coat stood at the corner, still there, head bowed, watching. My breath stuck. How many blocks had I walked already? How far behind was he? I ducked inside and slammed the door, safe for now. Inside the lobby, I leaned against the door and closed my eyes a moment. Inside my apartment, lights on, locks engaged, windows shut. I told myself I was safe. My phone buzzed, a text from a friend asking if I'd made it home. I answered, yes. I didn't tell them why I had walked. I didn't tell them what I saw. I went to bed and tried to sleep. Around 3 a.m., I woke. The bedroom was lit dimly by the streetlight outside the window. I saw the curtain shift and pulled it aside. There, on the sidewalk outside my building, the woman in the pale dress, hair long, was gliding slowly, her face turned toward me. I froze. She raised her arm and slowly pointed up at my window. I blinked. Then she turned away and floated into the blackness of the street. My heart exploded. I backed away from the window, dropped to the bed, pulled the covers over me. The streetlight flickered out. The room plunged into darkness except for the faint glow of the moon behind the curtains. I did not sleep again. When dawn came, I looked out the window. No sign of the woman. The sidewalk clear. The street empty. I told myself it had been a nightmare or sleep paralysis. But I knew something else had been there and was watching. A few days later, I met with a coworker who lived in that same neighborhood. I described the man in the long coat and the woman on the bench and outside my apartment. She looked at me steadily, then said, "You know about the old mill property over on Willow Drive? They say a girl died there decades ago, the same way she had been wearing. White dress, long hair, vanished in the night. And a man, well, they say he stands under the streetlight at Willow as a sentinel, waiting for someone to notice." I felt my blood run cold. I asked her for more information. She told me, in the 1980s, a reclusive man lived in that old mill building. His wife died, maybe by suicide, maybe by foul play. They never clarified. And he wandered the grounds at night in that long coat. The girl was a neighbor who disappeared near the same property. The local teenagers told stories. If you walked alone at midnight near that gate, you might see them both. Weeks went by. I avoided walking at night. If I did go out, I took a taxi. But one night I had to walk home because the bus stopped running. I left late, leaving the store in downtown and taking my regular route. The street was dark and quiet. I approached Willow Drive corner and saw the man under the light. I froze at the curb. He looked up, and our eyes locked for a moment. Then I crossed the street at the last second and kept walking. But when I turned onto Maple Street, I heard footsteps behind me, matching me stride by stride. I dared not turn around until I reached the security lamp of my building. I felt the hairs on my neck rise. I raced up the stairs to my apartment, heart pounding. Inside, I looked back out the window. The man was standing there on the sidewalk, under the same light, watching. That night, I went to bed but didn't sleep. At about 2 a.m., I heard the closet door slide open. I sat up. My room was dark, except for the streetlight stripe across the floor. The closet door stood half open. Something was moving inside it. I switched on the light. The door slammed shut. I leapt out of bed and turned the door handle. Locked. I slammed it again. My hands were shaking. I sat against the wall, fuzzy tears rolling down without me realizing. Eventually morning came. I got dressed, sat at the kitchen table, coffee in hand, eyes glazed. I debated moving. I went back to the local library and searched for records of the old mill property on Willow Drive. I found a newspaper clipping from 1987. Young woman missing from Willow Drive. Search ends after days. Another from 1989. Former mill worker in long coat found dead at his home. Investigation closed. The names were different, but the details matched. The old house boarded up. The decades passing, the stories lingering. I stared at that clipping. The missing woman had been wearing a white dress. Witnesses claimed to see a figure near the park around that time. I shuddered. That night, I resolved to not walk at night anymore. But the next evening, the power in my building went out for 15 minutes around 11 p.m. I paced my apartment in semi-darkness, the windows all dark except for occasional streetlights. I kept thinking, if I'd walk tonight, I might see them. The man, the woman, waiting. Then I heard the scratching on the window pane beside my bed. I froze. My lamp was off. The moonlight showed a handprint at the glass, a pale palm pressing the window from the outside. I couldn't breathe. The window was locked, but the print, fresh, etched itself into the night. The hand retracted. The scratching stopped. After a long minute, I summoned the courage to stand and cross the room. The window was intact, no footprints on the sill. I backed away and sat staring at the opposite wall until the power came back. When I woke in the morning, there was something on the windowsill, a crushed white flower, petals strewn, no vase, no sign of how it got there. I picked it up and put it in a drawer. Weeks later, I tried to tell myself it was over. I moved my furniture. I got a new job that commenced at 6 a.m. rather than a nighttime shift. I thought the walking at night episodes were gone, but I knew they weren't, because even in daylight, I felt the eyes on me. I would catch glimpses out of the corner of my vision, the silhouette in the long coat just beyond the wall of trees of the park, the pale figure just inside the alley across the street. On a clear afternoon, I walked past the old mill property on Willow Drive, just to see with my own eyes. The gate creaked as I pushed it open. Tall weeds climbed the rusted chain link. The main building's windows were boarded. The door hung open slightly. I stepped inside. The air was stale, dusty. On the floor, near a column, I saw footprints in decades-old dust. Just one pair, long and narrow. I touched them lightly. The prints led toward a side room, door semi-open. Inside, the walls were peeling, and in one corner lay a white dress, yellowed with age, tangled on the floor. My stomach churned. I left quickly, as good as closing the gate. But as I walked away, I stopped short. At the window upstairs the floor where no board was nailed, someone looked down at me, a figure in the long coat. I didn't wait to see his face. I ran until I reached the sidewalk where I could see streetlights again. The calm of the city felt intrusive now. That night, I didn't sleep again. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling. The closet door opened again, this time slow, deliberate. I heard the soft whisper of fabric. The figure in the pale dress slid from the shadows of the room, stood at the foot of my bed, hair covering her face. I screamed, but no sound came. She raised one arm, then drifted across the bed without stepping. Her feet seemed to hover an inch above the covers. Her head turned, hair falling aside, and she stared at me with hollow eyes. I tried to move. My limbs refused. She whispered a name. My name. I could hear it in my mind, though it might have been my own fear conjuring it. And then she was gone. The closet door closed. The lamp flickered. My window across the room rattled, though the wind was still. I leapt out of bed, fled the apartment without clothes, down the stairs, out across the street. I didn't stop until I reached the 24-hour diner on Main Street. By the time the sun rose, I was sitting in a booth, coffee and toast in front of me, shaking. The morning light felt foreign. I told the waitress I was fine, just needed to sit a moment. My phone next to me, meanwhile, dinged with texts from coworkers checking why I didn't show up. I didn't reply. That day I packed a bag. I told my apartment manager I was moving out. I walked with my bag through the lobby, down the street, calls made and deposit retrieval set up. The man in the long coat? I passed by him again on Willow Drive. He tipped his head. I looked away. I moved into a suburb outside the city where the streetlights were brighter and the night quieter in a domestic, unthreatening way. But sometimes, when the wind rustles the trees or a branch knocks against the side of the house, I catch a glimpse out the window of someone standing on the street. Tall, long coat, pale dress. 2 figures, one for each sleepless night. And I wonder, was I ever really safe back there? Did I ever leave them behind? I still get dreams. The man at the streetlight, the woman in the dress crossing the park. Their steps match mine in the dream. I awake with my heart pounding, the duvet twisted around me, the window open to a breeze, though the air is still. At night, I don't walk. I don't look out. I shut the curtains, lock the door, and wait for the morning. Because I know what waits in the darkness when you walk alone, under streetlights that don't quite reach, through places where the living once owned the night, but the dead haven't yet left it. Theirs is the midnight hour, the whisper in the dark, the shape at the curb when there's no one else around. The next time I see a lone figure under a flickering lamp on a deserted street, I will cross the street. I will run. I will not look back. Story, the end. It was just after midnight on a Thursday in late September 2019 when I found myself walking home from the 24-hour diner where I worked. The streets of my small Midwestern town were quiet, almost eerily so. The diner was on Main Street, and my apartment was about a mile away, far enough that I could have driven, but I liked walking at night sometimes. It gave me a chance to clear my head after long shifts filled with the smell of grease and coffee. I stepped onto the sidewalk, the crisp night air hitting my face, carrying the faint scent of wet asphalt from the earlier rain. Streetlights flickered above, casting weak halos of orange against the black asphalt. I had my headphones in, listening to a quiet playlist, the music mingling with the hum of distant traffic. The first few blocks were normal. A couple of houses had lights on, a car passed every few minutes, and the night felt calm. I passed the old library, the one with the cracked windows and the faded sign, and I remember thinking how strange it looked in the night, like it was watching me. As I crossed 7th Street, I started to feel a presence behind me. At first, I brushed it off. Sometimes you just get that feeling, a trick of your mind when you're alone. But then I heard it, a soft, rhythmic tapping on the pavement. It was in sync with my steps, but slightly out of time, like someone was keeping pace just behind me. I slowed down. "Hello?" I called, trying to sound casual, but my voice sounded hollow in the empty street. Nothing. Just the wind rattling through the chain link fence of the abandoned lot next to the street. I kept walking, faster this time. The tapping followed, deliberate, methodical, keeping pace with me. My pulse quickened. I had walked this route 1,000 times, and I knew it well enough, but tonight it felt different. The shadows seemed thicker, darker. I passed a house with the porch light on. A man sat on the steps drinking from a bottle and nodded at me. I nodded back, grateful for any sign of normalcy. When I turned the corner onto Elm Street, the streetlights became sparse and the neighborhood was older, quieter. That's when I saw him. A man standing in the shadows across the street, half hidden behind a large oak tree. Tall, thin, wearing a dark hoodie with the hood pulled low over his face. He didn't move. He didn't step forward. He just stood there, staring. I froze. My headphones were still in, but the tapping was louder now, right behind me. I pulled one out and listened. Another step, dragging slightly, slow and deliberate. I spun around. Nothing. No one. I kept walking, quicker now, telling myself I was imagining it. But the dragging steps stayed close, relentless, echoing my movements. I tried to call someone on my phone, but the battery was dead. Typical, I thought, my luck always terrible at the worst time. As I approached the old factory at the end of Elm, I decided to cut through the alley beside it. It was a shortcut, dark but familiar. The alley was narrow, lined with tall fences and overgrown weeds. I could hear my sneakers scraping against the cracked pavement. Then I heard it, a whisper, soft, just behind me. I froze again, heart hammering. "Who's there?" My voice was barely audible, swallowed by the night. The whisper didn't answer, but the dragging step drew closer, unnervingly close. I ran. The alley opened onto Oak Avenue, a longer street that led straight to my apartment. I sprinted, dodging potholes, my breath coming in sharp bursts. Behind me, the footsteps followed, faster now, but still careful, calculated. I dared a glance over my shoulder and saw a flash of movement. A tall figure in a dark hoodie, keeping pace, always just far enough to stay in the shadows. Panic surged through me. I ran harder, ignoring my twisting ankle and burning lungs. I reached the first intersection, a street lamp above flickering weakly. I stopped under it, trying to catch my breath, peering into the darkness behind me. He wasn't there, just empty street, the shadows stretching long under the weak light. I forced myself forward, walking the last few blocks as fast as I could. Every so often, I felt like I was being watched. Every shadow seemed alive, every rustle of leaves a warning. When I finally reached my apartment building, I didn't even bother unlocking the door properly. I shoved it open, ran inside, and slammed it behind me. I called the police, but like before, there was little they could do. The street was empty, no trace of anyone following me. They suggested it could have been a homeless man, someone wandering, maybe even a prankster. But the dragging step, the whisper, the figure across the street, it didn't feel like any ordinary encounter. That night I didn't sleep. I sat by the window, peering into the dark alley and empty street, waiting for the sound to return. I never saw him again, at least not in that town. But over the next year, I heard similar stories from other residents. People walking home late, seeing a tall figure in a hoodie, hearing dragging steps behind them. No one ever caught him. I moved away the next year, but I never forgot the sound of those slow, deliberate steps, keeping pace, waiting, always patient. Even now, I hesitate to walk alone after dark. I never know if he's still out there, lurking in the shadows, waiting for someone else to walk that familiar mile alone. Story. The end. I hurried down the dimly lit sidewalk, the August air thick with the humidity of a city that never quite cooled off. I'd been working late, again, at the small marketing firm near downtown Cleveland, and the shuttle that usually picked me up had broken down. My only option was to walk the half mile to my apartment. I checked my phone. 11:17 p.m. No texts, no missed calls. Just the glow of the screen and the streetlights casting long, tremulous shadows across the pavement. The neighborhood was quiet, except for the occasional hum of a passing car and the distant bark of a dog. I pulled my jacket tighter around my shoulders, despite the warmth. I didn't like being exposed. The trees along the boulevard cast angular silhouettes, branches reaching out like grasping fingers, their leaves rustling softly. I tried to keep my stride purposeful, but I couldn't shake the sense that I was being watched. About 3 minutes into the walk, I noticed something odd. On the opposite side of the street, I caught a figure just standing there under a street lamp. The lamp flickered. He was tall, lean, his hands in his pockets. He didn't move. I slowed. He didn't shift. Our eyes met for a moment. I felt my heart thump. Then he turned his head away, looking past me, and I resumed walking. My pace picked up. I decided to avoid the sidewalk closer to the brushy edge where the trees dropped thick shadows onto the path. I moved nearer to the street, to the halo of the streetlights. Up ahead, the road curved, and I could see my building beyond it. A low brick complex with the front light on, the lobby glowing. I began to feel safe, almost. That's when I heard footsteps behind me. Quiet at first. A soft scuff, maybe a sneaker on pavement. My pulse jumped. I glanced over my shoulder. Nothing. I dared another glance a bit later, a dark shape at a distance trailing me. My throat dry, I considered turning around and asking someone for a ride, but there was no one. The street was silent. I told myself, it's nothing. Maybe a jogger, maybe a stray dog. But the interval between the steps and mine matched. I sped up. They sped up. The sound was distant but distinct. Heel-toe, pause, heel-toe. I kept moving, and the sound kept coming. Closer. Closer. My breathing caught. I broke into a jog, my phone light pressed into the sidewalk in front of me. I hated looking back. The light spilled into the dark, but the shape remained just behind a street lamp's reach. Then, as I passed beneath the lamp, I looked directly over my shoulder and saw him again. The figure under the lamp. He was following me. No hat, messy hair, pale skin maybe. The air seemed to shift. Cooler now, though nothing changed. I clutched my bag tighter, the strap digging into my shoulder. I considered ducking into a convenience store across the street. The neon sign buzzed quietly, the door framed in glass and cold white light. But I was only a block away from home. I thought, I'll just run the last stretch. I darted. The footsteps behind me went fast, closer. My lungs burning, I sprinted for the building entrance. As I ran, I heard a voice, low, muffled but clear. Hey! I didn't stop. I slammed the lobby door behind me, nearly dropping my keys. I fumbled in the dark vestibule, found my key, locked the door. I leaned there for a moment, chest heaving, ears straining. Outside, the night seemed untouched. No shouting, no pounding, just the echo of my heartbeat. Inside, I went up the stairs instead of the elevator. Never bothered to wait, though I had the key card. Once in my apartment, I locked the door, balked the deadbolt, and peeked out the peephole. The hallway beyond was empty, no silhouette visible. I pulled blinds across the window and sat in the gloom, lights off, listening. Nothing. After 15 minutes, I convinced myself it was over. I showered, lay in bed, and stared at the ceiling, imagining shapes in the darkness. Sleep came eventually, uneasy. The next morning, I told my coworker about the late-night walk. She shrugged and said, maybe someone was just out for a walk, too. I tried to believe that. I got my coffee and moved on. 2 days later, late again, same route. I left the office around 11:30 p.m. I zipped my jacket and put earphones in, music loud. I tried to zone out, but I maintained watch, the same curb, the trees, streetlights. Then I saw him, under the same lamp, same posture, hand in pocket, looked right at me. My breath caught. I broke stride. He started walking, stepping off the curb, moving toward me slowly. I froze. He paused halfway across the street, just watched me. I snapped out of it, crossed quickly. He didn't follow at that moment. Perhaps he waited. I reached the convenience store and ducked inside briefly. bought a bottle of water. Outside, I saw him at the edge of the glass facade, leaning, looking. I paid quickly and exited. He was gone. I sprinted the rest of the way again, heart tight in my chest. Inside, I locked the door and stayed in the living room until dawn. I told myself I would avoid walking at night. I asked for rides, but last night the shuttle again was unavailable. I had no choice. The office had emergency deadlines. I stepped into the street and stared at the sidewalk. I promised myself, keep your phone ready. Call the shuttle if you see him. Stick to the light. I began walking. The lamps overhead flickered and drone of insects hung in the air. I tried to keep a mental rhythm, left, right, left, like I was rehearsing for safety. The trees seemed to breathe with me. I kept glancing behind until I didn't want to, and eventually I forced myself not to. I focused on the ground, the cracks of the sidewalk. As I passed the lamp where I had seen him, I didn't look up. Halfway down the block, I felt a presence next to me on the street side, not the sidewalk side. I saw movement out of the corner of my eye. I thought, maybe it's a skateboarder or biker. I glanced, no wheels, no bicycle, just a man. He slowed to match my pace. I stopped walking for a second, waiting. He stopped a few feet behind, hidden in the shadows cast by an overhanging tree. I exhaled. A car passed, its headlights illuminating him. Pale face, dark shadows under his eyes, hair unkempt. He walked away as the car passed. When the beam receded, I was alone again. I ran. I scrambled through the lobby doors. I almost collapsed by the staircase landing. My phone vibrated. Text from the shuttle service. Vehicle out of service. Sorry. My stomach dropped. I had no backup. I sat on the stairs in the dark, trying to calm my breathing. I needed to call someone. I dialed my friend. She picked up sleepy. I whispered, I thought someone's following me. She told me to call emergency if I felt threatened. I shut off my phone after texting my location to her and went to the apartment. I lay awake until 3 a.m., listening. Every creak in the building, every rustle outside made me flinch. I checked the peephole, realized the blinds didn't cover the whole window. I made a makeshift stop with books pressed against the sill. I thought of that figure again. Then came the knock at the door. The secretary had left a package earlier, but I wasn't expecting anything else. The knock was a heavy thud, rhythmic. I sat up and whispered, "Who is it?" There was silence. Another thud. I grabbed my phone, called my friend again, whispering details. She told me to call security. But I don't live in a gated building with a desk. It's a simple apartment. I retrieved a kitchen knife and crept to the peephole. No one. The knob didn't move. I waited. Nothing. My heart thundered. I sat there until the knocking stopped. Then I heard footsteps recede down the hallway. I sank to the floor and cried. Next morning, I told management about the knocking. They said they'd check security cams. I felt slightly better. That evening, I decided to confront it. I left the office before midnight. I wore my jacket, kept headphones off. I kept my phone in my hand. As I left the building, I scanned around. Street lamp, tree shadows, sidewalk cracks. Then I felt a quick shadow slip across the street in front of me. I stopped and looked. Nothing. I took a deep breath and walked on. Soon I passed the lamp where we always stood, him and me. I glanced. He was there again. Tall, thin, face blank. He looked past me as if he were waiting for someone else. I froze for maybe a second too long. He turned his head toward me. His features seemed to change under the flickering light. His mouth opened in something like a smile, but wrong. I saw his teeth, yellow, crooked. The smile held. I forced myself to move. I called the shuttle company as time while walking. I'm outside building number 12, sidewalk, need pickup, just in case. And as I walked, I heard something behind me. A low humming. Not music, not a voice. Maybe his breath, maybe something else. I speed walked harder. The building entrance loomed. I lunged inside, punched at the keypad, stumbling. I hit the buzzer instead of the card reader. The buzzer chimed. I waited impatiently as the security door clicked open. I scrambled in, locked it behind me. The ride pulled away. That night, I told myself I wouldn't do it again. I'd arranged a ride home every night until the shuttle got fixed. I was safe, or so I thought. But a week later at midnight, I had to get another file printed downtown. I left at 10:45 p.m. to give myself leeway. I printed the file and walked out. I looked at my watch. 11:23 p.m. I dialed the ride. They said be there in 8 minutes. I went into the convenience store nearby, bought coffee. As I stepped out the door, the swivel bounced, and I saw him under the lamp across the street, eyes bluish in the bulb's halo. I froze. He didn't move. I exhaled sharply, stepped back inside. I didn't want to show fear, but I was terrified. I waited 10 minutes, sip by sip. The ride hadn't arrived. I stepped outside, the street empty. I saw footprints in sand at the curb. Not mine. Fresh. I clenched my coffee and started walking fast. The ride was late, maybe substitute driver. I told myself to stay calm. The shape appeared again behind me on the sidewalk. I slowed as I approached a tree. I tried to duck into shadow, call the ride. I fumbled the phone. The figure approached from ahead. Somehow, now in front. I shivered. His arms hung by his sides. He didn't speak. I turned a corner instinctively. He followed that corner behind. My mind screamed, "Go faster." I stumbled. The ride honked ahead. I leapt forward, keys flashing. The driver rolled down the window. "You okay?" I didn't answer, scrambled into the car. The driver said, "Someone was out walking behind you. Looked like he followed you a block back." I looked out the window. He stood at the curb, hands in his pockets. He watched us drive off. Once home, I sat on the couch, trembling. The blinds were drawn. My phone buzzed. It was a message from my friend. "Check your camera." I had installed a cheap Wi-Fi camera because of the earlier knocking. I opened the app and watched the front door. Timestamp 017 a.m. There it was, the figure's silhouette at the door. He raised his hand and knocked 3 times, then leapt back into the shadows. The camera's infrared caught his shape until he vanished. I sat back and exhaled. The ride home had saved me, but how many times before had I ignored the signs? I reached for my bag, opened it, pulled out pepper spray I had bought but never carried. Now I held it. I told myself, I'm going to carry this every time. I'm going to change my route. I'm going to call somebody to walk with. The next time the shuttle failed, I asked a coworker to walk me. She agreed. We left together and spoke about work, distraction. I felt better. But approaching that lamp, I glanced down the street. There he was, under the same lamp, but he turned and walked away as soon as we reached the curb. My coworker didn't see him. We reached the building. I sighed in relief. In the lobby, I told her what happened. She said, "Maybe he saw you before. Maybe he recognized you're walking alone." I nodded. We left together, and she stayed until I reached my door. Then one evening I decided I had enough. I changed the schedule. I arranged everything to leave before sundown. The air was cooler and the dusk lights softer. But that night, the building lights went dark early, the lamp posts flickering out at 8:45 p.m. I walked under a near-dead lamp, the glow barely enough. I felt a prickle of dread. About halfway home, I heard the footsteps behind me again. I turned and looked. No one. But I saw movement in the shadows ahead. I paused. The figure emerged into view, at the curb ahead, standing under a lamp that was flickering. I debated running. I looked at a neighbor's porch light across the street. It was on. Maybe I could go there. I angled across the street. He followed, stepped off the curb, walked at the same pace as me, but across the street. I made a decision. I would run to the porch light. I charged across. I knocked loudly on the door. The light turned on inside. A man answered, squinting. I said, "I think someone's following me." He nodded and called 911. I looked back. The figure stopped at the curb, stared. I entered the house, locked the door. I heard the siren in the distance. I watched until police arrived. I gave them a description. Tall male adult, unkempt hair, pale, dark eyes, last seen walking south on Maple Street. They took note, said they'd check the area and review cameras. I left the neighbor's house in a police car. They dropped me home. I thanked them. That night, I lay in bed and stared at the ceiling, thinking about all the alone walks, all the times he followed silently, all the nights I ignored it, all the times I should have changed the route earlier. The flicker of the lamp, the silhouette under it, that smile, wrong and too wide, the footsteps, never fast, always deliberate. I realized I had been lucky, and now I had control. I changed everything. I never walked alone after sundown again. I took rides, I varied the route, I checked around me, the shuttle got fixed. I still catch myself glancing over my shoulder at night, because sometimes that figure returns in the peripheral vision, under the street lamp where the shadows gather, silent, watching. Story. The end.